Well, hello and welcome everyone. And thank you all for joining us for this Northwestern Buffett Institute for Global Affairs Fireside Chat. I'm Annalise Riles, and I am the Executive Director of the Buffett Institute and Associate Provost for Global Affairs here at Northwestern. And Northwestern Buffett is the hub of connectivity for all things global at Northwestern. We're dedicated to bringing together the brightest minds from across the university and around the world to address critical global challenges that can't be solved from a singular disciplinary or geographical perspective. And this series is an opportunity for leading thinkers from government and business and civil society to dialogue with us as academics about pressing global issues. And today I am just thrilled and honored to welcome our very own US Senator Tammy Duckworth to Northwestern Buffett to talk about environmental justice. Senator Duckworth was elected to the US Senate in 2016 after representing Illinois' 8th congressional district in the US House of Representatives. She is an Iraq war veteran and in fact among the first Army women to fly combat missions in that conflict, a Purple Heart recipient, former Assistant Secretary to the US Department of Veteran Affairs. She's the first person born in Thailand to be elected to Congress, the second Asian American woman to serve in the Senate, the first woman with a disability to be elected to Congress, and the first senator to give birth while in office. Woohoo! Tammy, we're so excited to have you here for many reasons. One is that we at Northwestern Buffett are really focused on how researchers can join forces with other segments of society to make real progress on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I'll just mention that our delegation of faculty and students just returned from Glasgow from COP26, totally energized to redouble our efforts to do what we can to do our part for the climate crisis. And here, you are such an exceptional leader in the Senate on issues of climate justice. You're a founding member of the Senate's Environmental Justice Caucus, a member of the Senate Democrats Special Committee on the Climate Crisis. You're also chair of the Senate Environment and Public Works Subcommittee on Fisheries, Water, and Wildlife, and a member of the Clean Air and Nuclear Safety Subcommittee. So first of all, just thank you for all you do. And also thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, it's so great to be here. I'm excited that everybody's tuning in today. It's wonderful.
It's great. And yes, and thank you to all of our Northwestern community members who are joining us at this busy time during the year. Thank you for submitting questions in advance. We'll get to as many of those as we can in this time. So Senator Duckworth, let's start with climate change. I've often heard you frame climate change as a national security issue. What do you mean by that?
Well, we tend to think of national security as, how many tanks and guns and helicopters you have. But really the threats to our nation are ones that are also economic, that are also have to do with climate change. Our biggest near-peer competitor, the PRC, they're competing with us on multiple fronts, not just militarily with, their development of hypersonic missiles, but also economically and in other areas as well. And we have to think of climate change and its effects on not just like, it's good to be good to the earth and all that, but really have to talk about it in the sense of this is a national security threat to the United States. I mean, an easy example, if we do nothing about climate change, 100 United States bases will be underwater. Within the next 30 years. So, just that. To have 100 military bases flooded where you can't actually train the military. So we have to think of it as a global threat that threatens the very well-being of our nation. So what do you think are the biggest climate change priorities that Congress needs to have at the top of the agenda right now? I think the first and foremost is to get everybody on the same page that we have to do something. There are still people who would rather go for the short-term profit or short-term gain and not look at the larger picture overall. I will tell you that the folks who are the professionals in their various fields don't view this way. I mean, at the Department of Defense, for example, they have long acknowledged that climate change poses a risk to our military readiness. They've talked about the fact that rising sea levels are a danger to our bases, but also, by the way, droughts in Africa cause famine, which causes population migrations, would then lead to conflicts that we're going to get pulled into. So you want to stop those droughts from happening, wildfires and storms. And we just have to move away collectively from fossil fuels and invest in renewable clean energy solutions, invest in that carbon neutral future, but view it not just as a, it's just, all the greens, right? All the granola eating tree huggers there. That's what they care about. No, this is an existential threat to the well-being and success of our nation.
Well said. So let's start with water. So you recently introduced a bipartisan Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act, which has passed last month as part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So congratulations. And it authorizes more than $35 billion to upgrade infrastructure and address the threat of climate change on our water supply, and also provide assistance to marginalized communities. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about why this is so important and what kinds of projects this bill will fund.
Yeah, so I started working on water and got interested in water when I was in the House of Representatives, and I sat in the Oversight Committee hearings on the Flint water crisis. And I had just given birth to my first daughter, Abigail, at the time, and she was, I think, maybe 3 or 4 months old. And there was a mom, and I didn't see this woman, but I could see her hand holding a pink baby bottle that looked exactly like the same bottle I used to feed at my then 3-month-old daughter, in the crowd of people in the hearing. And she just had it above her head, and the water in it was brown. And it just hit me that, this woman was pregnant at the same time I was pregnant. Her daughter was growing up the same way my daughter was growing. Heck, we even used the same baby bottle with the same nipples on it. And yet, what would have been like for me to have been, unknowingly drinking lead for those 9 months of my pregnancy, and then to find out that I had been poisoning myself and my baby all along. And so I've been working on this ever since. And I looked at drinking water and wastewater from 2 lenses. One, this is a federal government responsibility. This is just as important as anything else. As maintaining the nation's readiness for military defense. We must maintain the ability of Americans to have access to clean, safe drinking water. And then I also look at it as an environmental justice issue, because too often the cost for the renovation of drinking water and wastewater systems are out of reach of communities that are poor, communities that are rural, communities that don't have the tax base to pay for them. And I'll give you a statistic. In 1971, the United States government's federal cost share for drinking water and water infrastructure projects was well over 65%, was closer to 70%. That was paid for by the federal government. By 2017, that number had dropped to below 10%. And so if you're not from a wealthy municipality, from a wealthy community that can afford, that has a tax base to pay, then you're doomed. You're doomed to sewage, seeping into your basement. You're doomed to dirty drinking water, and it becomes an environmental justice issue. So when I did this bill, I did 2 things. One, I wanted to increase the federal cost share, but then I also fenced off funding specifically for environmental justice communities, so that their cost share actually will come down to almost zero, so that they can actually mount these projects and clean up their drinking and wastewater systems.
That's incredible. It's really exciting. So actually, we had a question from the audience that I think connects nicely with this. One of our students asked, what should we do about what's known as so-called forever chemicals, these PFASs that are in our drinking or water supply? And these are chemicals that are in household products, baby bottles, and other things that never break down, and they've been linked to all kinds of diseases. What do you think?
Oh, well, we have to do several things simultaneously. One, we have to get them out of the system, right? We have to end the use of them. So that is one effort. And a lot of that is just, like right now I'm working with the DOD and also with fire departments, because one of the ways that PFAS gets into the system is actually through firefighting foams, and it gets into our groundwater. But by the way, all of our firefighting stations have been told this is the foam you're supposed to use for decades now, because it's the best to fight fires that are chemical fires. So we have to get the use out of the system. And then we have to simultaneously, we have to find a replacement that will do the job. When you have a battery factory or battery storage unit that was on fire, like we had in Illinois this past summer, you got to put that fire out. If there's nothing that will work, then you have to resort to using something like PFAS. Well, there needs to be viable alternatives. So there needs to be investment in that. And then there is the compensation piece, right? We need to make sure that we are not penalizing those firefighting departments that have used PFAS because the federal government have told them to. And then we have to come in and do the cleanup, and then we have to come in and do the remediation, especially in communities where you really have a lot of these chemicals in the groundwater. So it's three things. One, stop the usage. Two, have a real viable alternative and invest in those alternatives. And three, we have to deal with the remediation piece as well, because we can't just leave them. They're called forever chemicals for a reason. You can't just leave them on the ground or in the groundwater. We have to do the cleanup.
Yeah, so I hope that some of our engineers who are listening to this see this as a cause that they could take on. That's great. So now let's move maybe to nuclear. So nuclear energy has often been called an important part of the solution to climate change. And as you know, Illinois has more nuclear reactors than any other state and gets about 50% of its power from nuclear energy. But we also know that accidents happen, Chernobyl, Fukushima, and so on. And the current compensation scheme, the Price-Anderson Act, which compensates victims for nuclear accidents, is about to expire in 2025. Do you believe that the current scheme provides an adequate safety net and proper incentives for all the parties involved? What do you think?
No, I think we need to come back and relook at nuclear and all of the regulatory frameworks and the compensation schemes and all that around it, because we've just let it basically stagnate for all this time. Look, nuclear energy will absolutely play an essential role in getting our nation to cut carbon emissions on the scale that we need to mitigate the consequences of climate change. But in order to do that, it has to be safe and reliable. It means, and this is where all the people watching, we have to figure out safe long-term solutions for our nuclear waste. We need to have look at solutions to reusing the existing nuclear waste and getting more energy out of it. All of these solutions, should not have negative impacts on vulnerable environmental justice communities, because again, you're going to have places like Zion, Illinois, that becomes a stranded community holding onto this nuclear waste, and nobody wants to buy a house there, nobody wants to do a business there, and it enters this death spiral, ending up with a community that is trapped by the nuclear waste is still there. And so it's the same community, those same environmental justice communities that end up bearing the burden of our nuclear activities. Nuclear accidents have the potential to lead to significant offsite effects. Zion, Illinois, again, I'm using that as an example. That's on the lake shore. That stranded nuclear waste is on the lake shore. In an area that if seawaters rise, if lake waters rise, they're going to be, that nuclear waste is in the path of negative climate change. So I think that agencies like EPA, NRC, DOE need to be properly funded and staffed, because they've been devastated and in terms of staffing. And we have to make those investments to really facilitate robust emergency preparedness. We in Illinois are very, very lucky. We have 2 national laboratories that are crown jewels, and we need to be making huge investments in those programs. I just think there much more needs to be done regarding the plan for our nuclear waste, and coming up with better safety standards and also better ways, better techniques for using the nuclear waste that we already have. But absolutely, nuclear is going to be part of the solution into the future.
So you mentioned disproportionate impacts on underprivileged communities a couple of times. And as I mentioned before, you're a founding member of the Senate's Environmental Justice Caucus, which really focuses on this issue. Can you talk a little bit about your work with those communities and why a social justice lens is so important when we think about the environment?
Yeah, well, first off, we have to think of this as social justice, as you said. It's every American, every person in this country has the right to breathe safe air, drink clean water, and live on uncontaminated land, regardless of their zip code, the size of their wallets, the color of their skin. But what happens is you have communities where, as they become the communities where we've located our, most industrial or polluting industries, what happens is you get the flight of the wealthy residents, and it becomes a hollowed out community. And pretty soon, when you have a new polluting activity that you need to have, where do you put it? You put it in the same communities over and over and over again. So there's this cumulative effect over decades, but in some cases in Chicago, hundreds of years of industrialization that have taken place via industries that have been located in the same communities over and over and over again. So environmental justice is social justice. It's social justice is, look, it's the balance of wealth, opportunity, and privilege within a society, right? That's what social justice is. And then for decades, communities of color and low-income communities have been unequally treated, have not been given the same opportunities to that wealth opportunity, to those privileges within our society. And in fact, what they've been given an unequal access to is the pollution on which we have industrialized and on which the rest of us have built our wealth. There's a saying, a rising tide raises all boats, right? Not if your boat has a hole in it. And so we have to fix those issues first. The Environmental Justice wrote a bill to start that long journey towards this justice, and it's called the Environmental Justice for All Act. It aims to put disadvantaged, vulnerable communities at the center of solutions for our environmental crisis. Let's invest in them and have them lead the way towards dealing with climate change. I think it's a comprehensive piece of legislation. It's focused on achieving health, equity, climate justice for all. And it requires, the consideration of cumulative impacts. One of the things I'm really proud of with the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the drinking water and wastewater piece was I was able to put into there a regulatory change for the EPA so that when EPA gives a permit to a new activity that's going to, be a polluting activity or a new industry, they must look at the cumulative effects of past activities in that community, not just what the polluting activity of this one industry is going to be. And that's really going to help these environmental justice communities.
That's fantastic. And really like your idea also of giving those communities leadership in this and not just dictating solutions. So that's exciting. So this question of the compensation owed to communities that have been disproportionately impacted, I think sort of leads us to COP26. So this is the UN climate change conference that we just had in Glasgow. And as you know, there was a lot of debate there about what kind of compensation is due to those who've been disproportionately affected by climate change, whether it's small island states in the Pacific or communities on the coastline here in the US. And of course, the US is one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases. So how do you think we should think about our obligations to those communities that are really suffering the most from climate change, whether they're in the US or abroad?
Well, I think that, we first of all have to agree and fully move forward with renewable energy research, development, and deployment in order to phase out harmful fossil fuels. And I do think that, again, we should be helping these communities that have borne the brunt, but really bring them in to help lead the fight so that they can, for a change, be the ones who benefit from the next generation of technologies that are coming out. And so I don't see why, I'll give you an example. I have what I call the Marshall Plan for coal country. So people don't know this, but Illinois has more coal miners living in it than West Virginia does. A lot of in southeastern Illinois, and a lot of retired coal miners live there. But my Marshall Plan for coal country takes advantage of the technical expertise that coal mining today is not, guys with pickaxes and wagons that you are manually loading. It's a high-tech industry, and taking advantage of, let's make the investments in next generation of technologies and renewable energies, and let's incentivize through government incentives the location of these new industries and then the location of this research in those communities. And in order to let them lead the way towards a greener future. Let's we're going to have to build a factory to, or we're going to rebuild an institution to do research in any one of these forms of renewables. Let's do it in coal country, and take advantage of the capacity for technological innovation that's there, because they've been doing it in coal mines. So we can do the same around the world. I really think it's very important that we bring these communities to the table as an equal partner, and understand that we have a responsibility to perhaps locate these new activities towards a carbon neutral future in those areas. And that, really puts Illinois in a great position, because we have many of these environmental justice communities, but we also have universities like this, like, Northwestern, Northwestern that can help lead the way.
It's interesting because there was this commitment at COP26 to phase down the use of coal, but we weren't quite sure how we would do that. So you've given us a roadmap for how we might actually go about implementing our commitment under that. That's very.
I think what you do is you set a carbon neutral date, and then you let the marketplace move forward. And then if you're going to subsidize a particular industry, then you give the same level of subsidies to all of the other forms of technology. And this is where I'm a capitalist, right? I'm like, I'm not going to pick which energy gets us there. I think it's going to be a combination of energy sources, but just pick that carbon neutral date. And then if you're going to subsidize wind, then you need to subsidize solar, you need to subsidize biofuels, you need to subsidize cleaner nuclear at the same level, and then let the smart people in the room to decide, to work on the technologies to get us to that carbon neutral future.
Interesting. So Tammy, we've got a lot of students, a lot of young people watching today. And one of the things that really struck me in Glasgow was how committed and passionate and maybe even angry some young people are.
They should be.
And they just kept asking, why are the adults not getting their act together and finding a way to do what's obviously in everyone's best interest. And I was thinking about you because, you know a lot about sacrifice for the common good. You've sacrificed a lot for this nation. Why do you think it's so difficult for us to sacrifice for our common interest, which is, preserving our land and our environment? What do you think?
Because there are groups within our society that don't want to make those sacrifices. They would rather safeguard their own interests at the expense of everyone else. They're more concerned about safeguarding their short-term interests than they are our entire collective's long-term interest. Bottom line, the fossil fuel industry has actively opposed many forms of alternative energies going back literally decades. And so that's just the bottom line. I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C. right now, where there's potentially a government shutdown that's going to cost American taxpayers, hundreds of millions of dollars. And even though Democrats and Republicans have come to an agreement, there's 3 senators who are probably going to cause the shutdown to happen. They're not, but they're folks who potentially are going to run for president one day. And so, they're more interested in their own short-term gain and than they are in the pain of the nation. There's a great op-ed that's out there right now on it. So we have to, that's what's happening. So what do we do? I think what we do is we do come together globally. We do push folks to come together. But I do also think that spending on climate change initiatives should not be optional. They should be seen as essential. And once that happens, then people are not able to opt out of it, because people will always opt out of it if they can, and they'll just choose to let other people sacrifice instead of themselves. So that making things essential or even mandatory in some cases, like the way we do with seatbelts in cars, is something that I think is really important. And by the way, it's good. When we increase the fuel efficiency of cars, the requirements of fuel efficient cars, our auto manufacturers fought against that, and yet they met them, and then they were able. They liked it because they're like, oh, you know what? Now other countries are starting to buy American cars because we have the most fuel efficient cars. We now have an economic advantage over our competitors around the world. So let's keep those standards up there.
Yeah. I think we got more questions about this issue, Tammy, than anything else from our students for today. And the question was sort of, well, how are we going to? It's great to think about mandating those things, but we know, as you said, that things are really gridlocked in Washington. So how can we possibly actually bridge this partisan gap around this question? And are there any spaces in which you do think that there would be common ground to be found between Republicans and Democrats? What do you think?
Yeah, so I sort of So this is my role on the the Democratic committee on climate change. My role is to talk about the national security implications. And I had a commanding general of the Illinois National Guard. This was, like 12 years ago when I was still serving. Came in one day and he stood in front of all of us, General Enyard, Bill Enyard, who later became a congressman, and he stood in front of all of us and goes, "Listen, I don't," and this was right when there was the presidential debates where all the Republicans raised their hand and said they didn't believe in climate change. How many of you don't believe in climate change? And they all raised their hands. And he said the next day he came in and he said, "Listen, I don't care whether or not you believe in climate change, but the ice caps are melting and the Russians are pushing into the Arctic Sea to go in there and mine and grab those resources. And it's going to mean that American forces, you and I in uniform, are going to end up having to go and be deployed to oppose Russian activities. So I don't care whether or not you believe in climate change. It's affecting us and we better be ready." And the fact that Boko Haram is taking advantage of drought in Africa, where you have ethnic groups that are moving around, this is a problem for us. And so what I say to my colleagues, is in some cases I try to find a way for them to get to a yes in very narrow focus places. And I talk about battery storage technology. Storage technology is really vitally important as we move into electric vehicles and other forms of sustainable energy. But it's also really important to the military, because when I was a logistics officer in the Army, I spent my time coordinating all the different types of batteries that we needed for our night vision goggles, the batteries that we needed for the laser targeting devices on our rifles. We needed special batteries for different things on the helicopters, and it was dozens and dozens of different of batteries. And I remember, what I've said to them is that, as a commander of a unit, I would rather have far more efficient batteries so that my soldiers could carry more bullets and fewer batteries in their rucksack. So let's invest in batteries technology. You may not believe in climate change, and you may say, "You know what? It's not going to happen in my lifetime. I don't care." But you should care about our troops. And if you say you care about our troops, you say you care about military security. So let's put some money into battery storage technology. And this is where I think places like the DoD, places like Veterans Affairs can actually help lead the way in much of the climate fight.
Yeah, and a lot of our engineers are doing that battery research right here at Northwestern. So it's great to hear. Well, actually, maybe that brings us to a next question I had for you, which is about how we as universities can do more and how we can partner with you and help you in this important work that you're doing. So you may know we at Northwestern are the secretariat of something called the U7 Plus Alliance of World Universities, which is a coalition of top universities in the G7 countries that are dedicated to coordinating with government leaders to try to achieve solutions in this and other areas. And we've just signed a pledge of our own about our own sustainability on our campuses, which is super exciting. But what else do you think universities need to be doing or could be doing? Or how could we partner better with you and with policymakers to address this crisis? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think there's two big buckets, right? One, which is the human resources that you have, and then the other is how you run your own house, right? Universities like Northwestern have the capacity to address climate change as vital hubs of research and information. So that is the human resource you have, right? The ability to have thousands of students from all over the world that visit your campus daily, which makes it an amazing place to share information how to best address the climate crisis. And then the other is what you're doing within your own house, which is what you've done with greenhouse gas reduction within Northwestern is a great first step. College campuses operate like small towns with large emission and consumption rates, and providing a real unique opportunity to become examples for best practices that can be used, to influence policy in federal and local levels, for you to be able to come back to me and say, this is what we have done and here's the data. And we've tested it out because our campus is a small town. Everything from green dorms to generate on-campus power to thermal, heating and cooling, low carbon transportation for students, limit campus waste. One of the things I've been fighting for is to try to get the military to build, to invest in technologies for mobile biofuel stills so that a unit could actually generate some of its own, I just think of all of the dining halls we had in 20 years in Iraq and all of the waste that we generated there, food waste from all of those dining facilities that then went into a burn pit, as opposed to into, a biofuel still that we could have run for 20 years and would have kept, multiple convoys off the road to be shot at by our enemy because they didn't have to go and pick up diesel fuel at the port because we were generating our own fuel. We could have been generating our own fuel to run our own generator. So a lot of those types of innovation and innovative ideas, Northwestern can be a real partner in that. I really do think that the physical aspect of small town, being Northwestern being a small town, but also coupled with the amazing research capacity, and that Northwestern, along with other universities in our country, can really help show leaders in Washington that these solutions do work. You can make them cost effective. You can, apply them and make it and see a short term effect. That is what I need so that I can go to the floor and say, hey, let's do this. I can go to the Congressional Budget Office and say, look, here's the data. If we put solar panels on every rooftop in the entire VA system of over 10,000 buildings, we could actually generate this much power and we would save the taxpayer money.
That's really exciting. So both the military and universities as sort of living labs where we can try things out and demonstrate that they can work. Love to work with you more on that. That's really exciting. So, okay, well, we're sort of at the time now that I'd like to switch to some of our questions from the audience, if that's okay. So, let's see. We had a question about lead. So one of our viewers wrote in to say the estimated cost of replacing every lead service line in America is anywhere from 3 to 4 times the amount of federal infrastructure funding. Given that Illinois and Chicago are the state and the city with the most lead service lines in the nation, how do we solve this problem? And how do we decide about priorities for replacement and how to do so equitably? What do you think?
Yes, so you're right about what's in the infrastructure bill. Is about a third or a quarter of what is needed to replace all of the lead in the country. But what is authorized is actually enough to do it. So you have to learn the difference between authorized and appropriated. So I was able to get authorized through my Drinking Water and Wastewater Act, which was separate from the infrastructure bill. My Drinking Water and Wastewater Act passed the Senate with 89 votes. And that authorized, so it says, hey, you can spend, this is your credit limit to spend. And the credit limit is high enough for us to actually replace every lead service line in the nation. Now, what we did was we said, but we're only going to spend this much because this is how much money we have right now. But because that fund is there, in future years, we can actually put more money into the system. So what we funded was enough to get us through the first 10 years, and then we can put more money in to fund the rest of the system. And by the way, the rate of replacement is only it's going to grow exponentially, because at first, we're not going to have enough of the engineers, and we won't have the capacity to actually go out there and do a massive nationwide lead replacement project. Because we just don't have the pipe plumbers and pipe fitters to do it. So we're going to grow that workforce through these first 5-10 years. And you're going to see that the speed that we replace it's going to be a curve that goes straight up, where once we get through the initial ramp up, then we can actually replace more, and then we can put more money into the fund. And there's a commitment from the White House and from President Biden himself that we're going to get there, because it is one of his priorities to replace 100% of the lead service lines in the nation.
Interesting. So maybe this is part of your Marshall Plan for coal miners we're going to need a lot more lead pipe removers in the future.
Well, yeah, the plumbers and pipe fitters, it's workforce development. And that's just as important as money to buy the piping themselves, the fittings themselves.
Absolutely. Okay, turning from climate, we've got a few other questions here. One is about the Bipartisan Protecting Moms Who Served Act of 2021 that you've championed. And this is an act to help mothers in the military receive better health care. So can you tell us a little bit about what are the particular challenges that mothers in the military face, and why is this important?
Well, let me start off with our nation. Our nation is, people don't realize this, our nation is undergoing currently a maternal mortality crisis. We have the highest maternal mortality rate in the nation. And the rate for maternal mortality in Illinois, and in particular the Chicagoland area, is almost twice the national average. Wow. So there's a problem here, and it is especially severe among mothers of color. And so that is something I and Representative Underwood have what we call our momnibus piece of legislation, which has a lot of smaller pieces underneath it. This piece that we were able, and I'm so proud we were able to get it passed, and President Biden signed into law on Tuesday, addresses military women. It puts money into funding $15 million in maternity care coordination programs at VA facilities, by recognizing that our nation's veterans are not just men, and actually specifically puts money into the VA system that is fenced off, that is purely for coordination between VA facilities and non-VA facilities in the delivery of maternity care and healthcare services. So for example, the VA can't do maternity, you can't have a baby at a VA facility because there's no place. I mean, I remember at Jesse Hines, at Hines VA Medical Center a few years back, they had a woman who was in labor, and she's a civilian, and came through the doors of Hines through the emergency room, and she gave birth, but then they couldn't weigh the baby because they didn't have a scale for weighing babies, because the VA doesn't do maternity care. It's going to fix a lot of that stuff. And by the way, I don't necessarily want our women veterans to give birth in VA hospitals. I want them to give birth in the premier places like I did at Northwestern, where they're going to get the absolute best care with the people who do the most number of deliveries, right? The VA, if you only do 10 deliveries, if only 10% of your patient population, you don't want to go, you're going to get better care where maternity care, that's what they do. So we want our veterans to be able to go there. And that's why this coordination between VA and non-VA facilities is so important. It's going to commission the first ever comprehensive GAO study to submit to Congress on maternal mortality and severe maternal morbidity among veterans. That's never been done. And it's also going to require both DoD and VA to look at, and VA in particular, to look at studying and how we can better listen to women. A lot of times these pregnancy adverse medical health outcomes and complications are simply ignored. And especially among Black and brown women in particular. And so I'm really proud of that. There's more to the work that we're doing, and not just for women veterans, but for women in general, because as I said, it's shameful that the United States of America, the most powerful nation on the face of the earth, also has the highest maternal mortality rate in the developed world.
That's great. That's exciting. Okay, so another one of our students asks, what is one feature of the US political system that you'd like to keep if you could maybe wave a magic wand and do whatever you like? And what is one feature that you might want to change or throw out? It's an interesting question.
Well, the one thing that I'm going to change, which is very near, which is to restore the filibuster to what it was. I would rather the filibuster be not, you need 60 votes to pass legislation, to you need 40 votes to stop a piece of legislation, to restore the filibuster to what it is, so that it is not a case where a few people can stop movement forward. And so that's my, what would I change? What would I make? What I would like to keep, the opportunity that anyone can run for representative office in this country. And any one of us, and I think that's really critical. And we can participate, whether or not you're a citizen, even you can participate in our democracy. And I think that is really valuable. That there's not a requirement, and we have to stop those requirements from being put into place. So you see a lot of these voter restriction laws that are happening. We have to stop that. But the fact that I'm a United States Senator, for crying out loud. I never thought that would ever happen when I was, a kid on food stamps who was thinking about dropping out of high school because I didn't have enough to eat. And yet here I am. And you can run for your local library board of trustees. You can run to be mayor, and just the accessibility of our political system is something I'm very, very proud of.
Very interesting. And finally, one of our students asks, where do you think the Democratic Party is heading at this moment? All that's happening, what would you say?
Yeah, well, I think we are a very diverse umbrella. And so people like to say Democrats are in disarray, but I will tell you, we are delivering so much for the American people in just the first 11 months of President Biden's, presidency. We delivered the American Rescue Plan that not a single Senate Republican voted for. We delivered the bipartisan infrastructure deal. We're gonna deliver significant changes to our social and support for our social infrastructure. I think we're going to get stronger. I think that as Americans see that it is Democrats that are delivering the significant changes that make their lives better and makes our nation more competitive. You're going to see us become more and more diverse as a party. In the House of Representatives, we're already a majority minority party. So there are, but in the Senate, that's not the case. The reason that I'm the first senator to give birth, is because there are not enough young women serving in the Senate, and there need to be. And by the way, I'm not young. I was 50. It was 2 weeks after I turned 50 that I gave birth. So we need to get more young women running and in the pipeline, so that we can have somebody in the Senate who's a woman who's in her 30s. So it becomes a normal thing to happen. I think you're going to see the Democratic Party become more and more diverse. And much more representative of the American people than the Republican Party. And I hope one day soon this statement will not be true. And the statement is, right now there are as many white men named John in the United States Senate as there are people of color. That's wrong.
That's pretty appalling. Okay. Yeah. So maybe I'll just end by asking you, we've talked about a lot of big challenges today, and a lot of pretty depressing issues, perhaps. Ultimately, what are you most hopeful about, Tammy, at this moment?
I am hopeful. I am actually very optimistic, because we did get things passed. We did get the American Rescue Plan there, and all those families, we lifted 50% of the kids who were living in poverty in January of 2021 are no longer living in poverty, because we got those checks to those parents for the last 4 months. They've received a check that will help them to buy food for their family and pay their rent. We're delivering on the bipartisan infrastructure deal, and that I'm proud of my work on the drinking water and wastewater portion of it. We're going to replace 100% of the lead service lines in this country. We're going to make those significant investments in clean energy and moving towards a carbon neutral future. And we're going to deliver on this social infrastructure deal with Build Back Better. We're going to see that women are no longer going to be sidelined and not able to go to work because there's not enough daycare centers. We're going to make sure that people don't get gouged by pharmaceuticals that unnecessarily raise the price of common drugs. People are no longer going to pay $600 a month for insulin, because we're going to put a $35 a month cap on it. These are all good things. So I am actually very hopeful and very enthusiastic, because I've gotten more done in this past 11 months, even in this environment, than I have had in a long time. And so I'm raring to go.
That's super exciting. Well, listen, thank you so much. I know this is an extremely busy day for you with all that's happening in Washington. And we really thank you for being here with us, and wish you the best. And please see us as a partner in any way that we can be in your work.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.